The real-time strategy genre takes a not-so-bold step into familiar territory with Order of War. Sure, it's World War II, and yes, we've been there and done that, but developer Wargaming.net is banking on an epic presentation and some innovative game mechanics to bring a fresh perspective to a setting that's already been done very, very well.
The Western Allies landed in Normandy and managed to break through the beach defenses into the open country.
The focus of Order of War is clearly on scope. Rather than the zoomed-in personal perspective found in games like Company of Heroes, Order of War puts you in the general seat with an eye toward the big picture. Command of your units is limited to general attacks, presses, and tactical facing. Your soldiers in armor will usually fend for themselves if left alone. However, you can give them a nudge to safety by directing them to nearby foxholes and abandoned houses. Troop types are the predictable mix of specialized soldiers, tanks, artillery, and anti-air. It's nothing fancy, which isn't surprising given that the game is aiming for historical accuracy. Base building has been completely removed from the game. Instead, Order of War uses a replenishing resource counter from which you can request reinforcements and tactical support. By controlling key parts of the map, you can increase the rate, which allows you to throw more modern units into the battlefield. We first saw this in the modern military strategy game World in Conflict. The way it works in Order of War is functionally identical. The main campaign in Order of War leads you through two different perspectives on the European theater. The first part follows the Allies from Normandy on through the various parts of France, while the second highlights the German struggle against the overwhelmingly resilient Russian forces. The 18 missions in the campaign don't necessarily paint a completely linear picture of the war, but instead give a nice bit of variety in terms of location and mission structure. Skirmish Mode allows for single and multiplayer matches using any combination of Allied, German, and Russian forces.
Ja, feindliche Einheiten werden angegriffen.
We already know that Order of War's concept is workable because we saw how World in Conflict did it. But the scope of the game and some quirks in how it's presented occasionally make it hard to play. Right off the bat, it's hard to tell what kinds of soldiers you have under your command just by looking at them unless you zoom in the camera to a functionally useless angle. The only way to reliably identify units is to turn on their icon overlay. And while it's usually obvious what unit types are effective in certain situations, this doesn't always hold true. The game doesn't give you enough on-screen feedback to make sound tactical decisions, and it fails to provide even the most rudimentary tools to control your troops. The interface also ignores some of the most standard features we've come to expect in a modern RTS. Yes, you can group units, but where is this displayed on the screen? Sure, you can select your troops from the list in the lower right corner of the screen, but how exactly is this organized? It doesn't help that the first few missions of the campaign toss you into intense, large-scale battles with dozens of units to control. How is that supposed to ease you into the game? Furthermore, the resource mechanic doesn't kick in until a few missions later, making your first impression of the game confusing, dull, and extremely limiting. Things improve later on in the campaign, but Skirmish Mode is where Order of War blossoms into a full-fledged RTS. All of the features are open and the strategic focus becomes very apparent. It's a tough, aggressive game that rewards effective use of your limited resources. Calling in a tactical strike on a bunch of enemies camping around a control point might seem like a no-brainer until you realize that you should have used your resources to reinforce your territory with anti-tank guns. Our recommendation is to skip the dreadful campaign and jump right into Skirmish. You'll learn the game faster and have more fun playing it. The developers clearly love the way Order of War looks. They like it so much they added a cinematic camera button. Push it, and you're treated to sweeping views of the battlefield, tracking shots as your soldiers try to take a hill, and all other kinds of wartime carnage. It's a nice way to showcase all the intricate graphics in the game, since the standard view is zoomed out pretty far. But since you can't actually control the game while you're in this mode, you'll likely never use it. So the game looks good, and the sounds are adequate, although the voice work is filled with lines that are read with inflection just a bit off.
Unfortunately, the enemy is trying to cut them off by moving in some of their fastest armored units to bypass our screening forces.
At least you don't have to choke down yet another somber war is hell and our boys are on the front line motif. This is a war game. It's all maps and tactics and grumpy generals barking orders. And we like it like that.
Suppressive fire! Ready for orders!
Attack!
You have to be ready to put some effort into liking Order of War. The things you would logically try first are the worst of what it has to offer. It's not really as deep as World in Conflict or Company of Heroes, but it does simple strategy decently well, and looks good doing it.